There's lots of acts that are illegal and lots of things it's illegal to possess. On the other hand, there's only a few actions a person is required to do by the penal code and can be criminally penalized for not doing. Remember, the elements of an offense include the forbidden conduct, the required culpability, the required result, and the negation of any exception to the offense. In this screencast, we'll discuss how the penal code characterizes prohibited conduct and specifically addresses possession. The penal code states, a person commits an offense only if he voluntarily engages in conduct, including an act, omission, or possession. Remember, an omission is a failure to act. Voluntary possession can be problematic because a person who's caught with something they're not supposed to have will frequently say, hey, that's not mine. Since we can't read minds and we can't always trust words, the penal code infers from the situation when possession of something is considered voluntary. The penal code states, possession is voluntary if the actor knowingly obtains the thing possessed, or receives the thing possessed, or is aware of his control of the thing for sufficient time to permit termination of control. So just because you don't have the drugs in your pocket doesn't mean you don't own them. Your possession of the drugs is considered voluntary if you have them in your glove box or even in the shed of your backyard. You are aware of them, or at least a reasonable person would have been aware of them, and you had sufficient time to seize control of them. Finally, the penal code states an omission is not an offense unless a law indicates specifically that the actor has a duty to act. So in order to commit a crime by omission, the penal code must state you had a specific responsibility to do something and you did not do it. Culpable mental states are very important parts of the elements of an offense. Remember, the elements of an offense include the forbidden conduct, the required culpability, the required result, and the negation of any exception to the offense. In this screencast, we'll discuss the culpable mental states. There are 4 culpable mental states in Texas. They are intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, and with criminal negligence. Other states may recognize different versions of culpable mental states or even indicate more, but these are the 4 used in Texas. Mental states are fundamental to criminal law and are connected to what is referred to in Latin as the mens rea, or guilty mind. In general terms, you typically can't commit a crime purely on accident. There has to be some sort of mental awareness going on. Now, this may seem confusing, but basically, you have to have some level of mental awareness, sometimes even just very slight, that your actions are criminal or may result in some negative result that could be considered criminal under law. Individual penal code offenses may contain one or more culpable mental states. Sometimes no culpable mental state is indicated, and if so, the penal code states the reader should assume the culpable mental state is intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. A statute may occasionally indicate no culpable mental state is required. For instance, intoxication offenses in Chapter 49 require no culpable mental state, but the majority of penal code offenses are linked to a culpable mental state. Let's start with intentionally. Intentionally is a conscious or objective desire to engage in the conduct or cause the result. For instance, when you aim an arrow at a target, you aim at the center of the target. Your intent is to put the arrow in the bullseye. The next culpable mental state in Texas is knowingly. Knowingly means you are aware of the nature of the conduct or that the circumstances exist and your conduct is reasonably certain to cause the result. For instance, when you aim an arrow at a target, you aim at the center of the target. Your objective or intent is to put the arrow in the bullseye, but you know there's a possibility you won't hit the bullseye and instead hit another part of the target. This knowledge is reasonable. The next Texas culpable mental state is recklessly. This is when a person consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk, and the disregard of that risk constitutes a gross deviation from what an ordinary person would exercise. For example, Would you fire an arrow at a target with a person standing next to it? No, you wouldn't, or at least I hope not. Why? A reasonable person knows this is a substantial and unjustifiable risk. Someone who would do this is believed to be exercising gross deviation from the norm. Your intent is not to hit the person standing next to the target, but once again, the risk of someone standing next to the target is substantial and unjustifiable, and a reasonable person probably wouldn't do that. The final Texas culpable mental state is criminal negligence. Criminal negligence is when a person ought to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk, and failure to perceive the risk constitutes a gross deviation from what an ordinary person would exercise. So, let's say your archery target is right next to a door. You have the ability to lock the door, but you don't, and someone comes through the door right as you shoot your arrow at the target. Did you know the person was going to come through the door right as you fired? Was it your intent to hit them? No, but the risk of this happening, even though it's remote, might still be considered a substantial and unjustifiable risk. You didn't know, but a reasonable person ought to have known. So let's review. There are 4 culpable mental states in Texas. They are intentionally, a conscious objective or desire to engage in conduct or cause a result; knowingly, aware of the nature of the conduct or that circumstances exist and the conduct is reasonably certain to cause the result; recklessly, a conscious disregard for a substantial and unjustifiable risk that is a gross deviation from the reasonable person standard; and finally, with criminal negligence, when a person ought to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk that is a gross deviation from the reasonable person standard. The Penal Code defines some ground rules for how culpable mental states are included in offenses and clarifies that certain acts can still be considered criminal even if the defendant didn't mean for the result to occur. The Penal Code states, a person does not commit an offense unless they have the required culpable mental state connected with the offense as required by statute. Again, though, a specific statute may indicate no mental state is required, and if a mental state is not indicated in a statute, the mental states of intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly suffices. The Penal Code also mandates an offense defined by municipal ordinance or county commissioner's ordinance must include a culpable mental state. The Penal Code further clarifies that proof of a higher degree of culpability than required satisfies the elements of the offense. For example, if a person is being prosecuted for an offense where the culpable mental state is recklessly, then they will be found guilty if the prosecutor can prove they committed the offense either intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, but not negligently. Finally, the Penal Code states a person is considered criminally responsible if the result would not have occurred but for their conduct. For example, a motorcyclist goes 120 miles per hour down the highway and crashes and kills his passenger. Did he mean for it to happen? No, of course not. But the result would not have occurred but for his conduct. In other words, him going 120 miles per hour down the highway. So the driver can be held criminally responsible.